Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. For this week's broadcast, I have a couple of very special friends. One is with me now, the other is still kind of trying to work through some technical difficulties that he's having in computer land. But both of these guests are very special friends. Dr. Sadia Ali Aden is a human rights advocate, humanitarian relief worker, and freelance writer. Brother Abukar Armin, when he's able to join us, is the Servant General of Basira Transformative Strategies. He's a former diplomat and a foreign policy analyst. Our topic for discussion today is challenges and opportunities in the Somali-American diaspora. And with that, without any further ado, I want to welcome our sister, Dr. Sadia Ali Aden, to the broadcast. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Sadia. I think you're on mute, my sister. I'm not hearing you.
Walaikum salam.
There you go. There you go. I hear you now.
How are you?
I'm doing fine, alhamdulillah. How are you doing?
Wonderful. I heard your message that our brother is busy with the computer land issues, huh?
Yes, he's wrestling with his computer, and hopefully he'll get it working the way it's supposed to work and join us before this broadcast ends. In fact, well before the broadcast ends.
Yeah.
Let's begin our conversation today, my sister, with you sharing your thoughts with the listening and viewing audience on what came to mind when I mentioned the title for today's broadcast: Challenges and Opportunities in the Somali-American Diaspora. What thoughts come to mind?
When you say challenges, sometimes challenges can be opportunity, and sometimes they can be challenges as in the negative, fashion. So many things came to mind. What came to mind is how the Somali-Americans, Somali diaspora as a whole, how successful they have been in some ways, and how many challenges that they're having, the difficulties in the countries that they're in, being a Black community and experiencing the systemic racism in the countries that they're in. But then, of course, you look at the other side and you say there are positive, stories to tell, challenges that they have faced, that they have used as a stepping stone to achieve success in the positive sense, whether it is going to school, getting better housing, and getting better education, schooling, and better housing, and also as far as going to the Congress when it comes to the, to the nation's capital and, Capitol Hill, like El-Hajj, or the state level Congress, State House, because Somalis basically have luckily succeeded in so many different ways. The latest was the mayor. Actually, I received the notice from you, which was wonderful. The Somali mayor in Maine, of all places, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, I remember when the Somalis first started arriving in Maine. There was I don't know if you remember, but there was a movie that they made that was called The Letter, and in fact, we participated. Is that our brother? we participated that where the mayor of the city at the time said, the Somalis, please don't come. We don't have enough resources for you. And there were protesters from all over United States. Somalis from Ohio and Minnesota and different states came to the city protesting. And today, the same state has a city where a Somali is a mayor, not only a Somali, a female, not only a female, but a female that shows the stereotype, stereotypical dressing of a Somali fashion. So I was so proud of her, and I am proud of the community.
Yes.
But still, there are so many challenges that we have to really overcome, just like any other community. So I'll leave it at that and hope that.
And our audience should know that the city, the city in Maine, in the state of Maine, that now has a Somali mayor, a female Somali mayor, who, when you look at her, you know that she is also a Muslim. Is 90% white.
Yep.
This is a 90% white city, and they elected a Somali-American mayor.
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
That's cultural, also very traditional.
And that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Very traditional. Mayor Deka Dalik, I believe her name is.
Yeah.
MashaAllah ta'ala. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
So, when I saw that, it just blew me away, especially the makeup of the city. It just blew me away.
Yeah.
And she has to be a very special person to have been entrusted with that kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
The Somali community in the U.S. has had more than its share of really severe challenges, and it's been my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the largest Somali population is in the state of Minnesota, and the second largest, and Minneapolis to be specific, and the second largest would be Columbus, Ohio. Is that still the case?
Yes. The largest state where Somalis have made their home is Minnesota, as you said, and the second is Ohio. But even though really I have not seen many stories that news reports that support that, I heard the state is Minnesota that has the largest, and Ohio is second. But city-wise, I heard Columbus has the largest Somali community.
City-wise, Columbus,
yes, city-wise,
larger than Minneapolis.
Yes, I heard city-wise, but of course we would have to confirm that, because Somalis, even as a number, Somalis will claim there's thousands and thousands beyond the number that's being documented. But then, my brother, I must mention this. I'm thinking the reason why the number Somalis claim does not equal or cannot be reconciled the number that the officials are documenting is because when the census were being done, and this is something that needs to be shared, Somalis, all of them will not click the box that says Black or African American. Some of them will click other, and they will put down Somali. So that actually undermines the effort of the people of color trying to show the number of people that they have in these particular cities or states. And this is where education is lacking in sharing with these communities, that saying you're Black doesn't mean you're losing your identity as a Somali or Ethiopian or Eritrean or Ghanese or Sudanese. All it says is they need to know how many Black people are living in this particular area. And of course, that will decide how much resource that area receives. So when you don't click that particular box, you're sort of denying the resource that community should receive. So it's very important. That's why I think the number may not correctly reflect the actual number of Somalis living in these states.
You know, a few years back, I was traveling back and forth quite a bit to Minnesota. In fact, my introduction to the state and to the Somali community there was a case that was very, very disturbing, a case of a number of young Somali Muslims that were targeted.
Yep.
Targeted by an ambitious state's attorney's office who wanted to make a name and to acquire more crumbs from the political table of of CVE largesse. Minnesota was one of the states that this program, Countering Violent Extremism, was unveiled in. It was one of the states. Good to have our brother Abukar with us now, alhamdulillah. But it was one of the states. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It was one of the states that that ended up being targeted, and I use the term targeted very, purposely, because it was targeted, and these young Somalis that were targeted in this campaign ended up being brought before a federal court and basically they were abused. They and their families and their community ended up being abused in the name of justice. Has the community recovered in any way from that assault that was made on it? And I put this question to both of you. This was a challenging question for you to weigh in on, Brother Abukar, as you join us now. It was very disturbing for me. It weighed on my heart, traveling back and forth from the Washington, D.C. area to Minnesota to do what I could to help the community deal with that storm that had been imposed upon it, and in very horrific ways. Where are things at now with that case, if either of you know?
Can you hear Brother Abukar?
And I just followed it. I just caught the tail end of what you guys were talking about. First of all, salam alaikum to both of you, and I apologize for coming late.
I wanted to know if what your thoughts are on what happened some years back with that case that emanated from the CVE program in Minnesota. That case that just attacked the community as a whole, but did a tremendous amount of damage to families and taking the young lives, young men, very young men, who were guilty of nothing more than aspirational offenses. I mean, none of them did anything materially to materially to commit or even to support in any significant ways any acts of terrorism abroad. And they were accused of, wanting to go abroad to engage in jihad. But I mean, none of them, none of the young men that were prosecuted went abroad to actually participate in actions in any country, and yet they ended up being prosecuted as if they had, and they got horrific sentences. So, your thoughts on that, and if you know where things are now, I would really appreciate personally knowing if there has been any relief. It's been a few years now since that trial took place.
Yeah. And Sadia, you want to say something?
Yeah, I've been talking all day, so
Oh, okay.
before you arrived, so I spent a lot of time taking more than I should. So go ahead, and then I'll chime in, inshallah.
Inshallah. And on that particular case, I don't know where it's at right now, and you know how this whole thing of counterterrorism or CVE or whatever name they gave afterwards. You can go back as far back as 2007, right around 2008, when the stories were just concocted that you can literally challenge and poke into its credibility. Stuff like, you remember the youth that were leaving Minnesota and blowing up bombs in Hargeisa and Bosaso and all of that. People were being fed all kinds of things that were very unsubstantiated. Now we can look back at those things and see how it was just concocted. Alhamdulillah, I wrote about some things back then that are available to be reviewed. Whatever we were saying at the time have proven right. In fact, there were people who were adamant about just isolating the community, or because they fit the stereotype. This foreign group that came were adhering to their religion, who dressed certain way. Stereotypically, they fit the image that they wanted to project, the extremist image, and the kids who are all ready to explode, wrap a belt around their waist and blow themselves up. The question that oftentimes so-called terrorist experts don't ask is, why would Al-Shabaab, for example, want to invite somebody from Minnesota to blow themselves in a far places in Somalia when they have plenty of volunteers? And why would they want to even trust that guy or those kids who are coming from there? How do they know that they're not moles or something? Normally they would be the first one to kill them. So there were a lot of questions that apparently the law enforcement at the time were just either ignoring or just setting the stage for those kind of incriminations to really let the narrative continue. It was post 9/11. There were not a lot of scrutiny, and community could be abused and so forth, and that lingered for a while. And then you had the CVE, which was really a reinvention of that first thing that I just described, because in this case it brought to the scene tons of money, and organizations were funded and turned against each other. People, stuff like that continued for a while. I think by now people are just aware of. They're well informed now, if you will, but the damage is done. I mean, the damage is done to a lot of people. I'm in the middle of reading, by the way, our friend Professor Sahar Aziz's book, The Racial Muslim, which really touches on some of these elements as well, and how the Muslims were racialized, personal, and pushed aside basically as as others, not as part of the community, basically. So
Yeah. That reminds me, I don't know, Brother Muri, if you have seen this, but there was a documentary produced by Al Jazeera called The Informant. And in that, when they start, one of the informants, he said, we're supposed to find terrorists, and if we didn't find them, we had to create them. And that's exactly what has been happening with these youth. They found a disillusioned youth that were either had mental health issues or had identity crisis, and who would, American kids who were born here, who are just like any other American teenager. And they carried on conversations with them. And what this documentary is talking about, and all other, articles talking about these issues, is that the FBI has spent a lot of money helping these informants achieve their goal of creating these terrorists from these young men, to the point they would even buy, the ammunitions that they needed, or guns, or anything else. And this brings me to just remember what happened with CARE, Ohio. We don't know exactly what the plan was, and I think the investigation is still going on. And maybe Brother Abukar can chime in on this. But there was a package that arrived that contained parts of, weapons that were bought with the credit card of, the organization's credit card. And those sort of things are scary. And I remember at the beginning, there was a publication years ago where we were informed that 20,000 informants were flooded with the Muslim mosques, Muslim masjids. And those are some of those who have targeted these youth. And they continue to not only do that, but also infiltrate organizations, Muslim organizations. So I'll leave it at that. But these are things that require, I think, a broader discussion, but do exist and need to be addressed. And I hope these different organizations that these communities are, politicians, these communities are supporting, regardless whether they're Democrats or Republicans, will really look into these issues and revisit them. Yeah.
Brother Abukar, the CARE Ohio controversy, where is that at now?
Other than what they have revealed publicly, there's not much, but they have enough information really that they are, they meaning the national office, actually, in collaboration with other law firms and investigators and those kind of people. They are following several, it was not just one individual. Let me just say this without really going ahead of what they're trying to do, because they intend to reveal and release some of these evidences, which they did. If you recall, the last video that they publicly released included 5 different or several evidences, I should say, that included emails between individuals. The mall that they had inside, which was the same office that I presided over for 3 years, and strangely, it was when he started working for them. Roman Iqbal is 2008, and that's the same year that I became the president of CARE Columbus. So anyway, I don't have much to add to that, so I'll leave it them. But they have enough evidence to really it'll really unveil a lot of truth that was not been known to a lot of people there, especially the organizations, Muslim organizations, and so forth. Some of us knew what was going on. That a lot of the organizations, like the co-conspirator list that you're aware of, Maurice, includes 300 plus individuals somewhere dead for many years before the list was given. And it listed practically every organization, Muslim organization imaginable, some of the biggest names. So some people were really their intention was clear, basically, to really bring down those organizations or smear them or criminalize their activities and make them look like they're here to cause havoc in this country, for example.
And you reside in Columbus. You knew this individual, Roman Iqbal. You knew him personally. Did you have any indication at all that he may have been capable of something like that? And has he been seen since, or has he just completely disappeared in Columbus?
And no, I don't think. Well, anyone that I know, I'm not aware of anyone that I know who has seen him in public, but that doesn't mean that he's not seen. But as far as how was he was just an ordinary, hardworking person. I mean, I would personally never have guessed that he was involved in such activities. He spoke and defended people well, and he interacted with the community well, and so forth. At least in those days that I worked closely with him. I haven't for the last 10 years, I guess. I was not part of that. When I became the special envoy for Somalia, I resigned from CARE, so I went to doing different work. So occasionally we ran into one another, but other than that, I was not really following how was he. But in the earlier years, definitely he was hardworking and looking, just as ordinary as anybody else in the office, basically.
I want to shift a little bit. You just mentioned, and I also included that in the introduction of you before you came on board, that you were the special envoy for Somalia to the U.S. What did that responsibility entail, and what did you learn from that, both about your native land, Somalia, and this country that you are a citizen of, the United States of America? What was that whole experience like?
Now that we would need an entire show for
Yeah,
that.
sure.
No, I mean, you learn a lot. In those days, of course, we didn't have any embassy. Now we do.
Yeah.
Now we have a full ambassador who's in Washington. And nevertheless, the interaction between the two countries has not changed much. And this may shock a lot of people. It changed for a while, and it was headed to the right direction. And when I'm saying the relationship between the two countries, I'm talking about state to state, engaging at a higher level conversation, what's in the best interest of both states. That level, I think, since 2015 or 2016, it was just, it went right back to where we came from, basically, when we were in the transitional period. Meaning at a lower level, officers engage in high level Somali officials, basically, in one way or another. The reason is because of primarily our fault. I mean, there is a in 2016 the situation was similar to what's going on today. In other words, people were just fighting over elections, just minor little things. Then you would think that the whole problem that Somalia has now is just to hold an election or decide which day the election is going to be, and everything else don't matter, you know. So they spend a year or two just each other on each other's throats. And meanwhile, there's always, and you know, Washington as well as anybody else, the lobbying continues. The predators who are just there, I'm talking about economic predators or financial predators, whatever you call them, who just want to go to countries such as Somalia, for example, and get a few contracts illegally by bribing this person or that person, not worrying about any consequences, and get little protection from their own governments. Those guys were doing their lobbies very heavily, and now you have those people who are in the green zone of Somalia, which is called Halane, and you have a lot of different individuals, the good and the bad and the ugly, you know, all of them housed in the same compound, basically. But most of them are mercenaries. Most of them are people who just want to hit and run, and economic hitmen, and those kind of people that you read about and you never believe that they exist until you look at countries such as Somalia. They run the show. And then, sadly, the U.S. government plays in. It does not have really a strategic partnership as it should with Somalia, especially in these times of geopolitical challenges and geostrategic challenges with China and all of these other places. It opted to give a lot of lip service, a lot of we give aid to security, we give food. Yeah, great. You give a lot of aid to security. Which security is that? You know, look at the Somali army, how it looks like. Compare that to the way Iraqi army was well funded, and Afghanistan, though both of those failed because of lack of a strategy. U.S. foreign policy was not driven by strategy. It was always driven, not always, but the last 20 years, it was like counterterrorism, you know, these kind of things that made no sense and drained this country out of a great deal of resources and bankrupt this country. And at the end of the day, like what happened in Afghanistan, everything was left in there. Now, going back to Somalia, and none of that money reaches the Somali army, for example, with the exception of 500 or so, 700, let's say, of counterterrorism contingent that was trained by the U.S., stayed in the U.S. Compound, were practically used for all kinds of things. They were not under the command and control of the Somali government up until when Trump said that I would be leaving Somalia just during the election time, if you recall, because he promised that he's going to pull all of the U.S. Troops from foreign countries. So in order to fulfill that, he took some of those who were in Somalia and put them back in Djibouti, just like an hour or so flight away. And meanwhile, left the Somalis who were trained, about 700 or so, wandering around there. And for them to get paid, they have to go to the government side. But they were never part of the government, and everybody knew this thing was not. So those are not really, those kind of the small contingent of armed forces are used for different purposes. They're not used to become part of that, the ordinary or the the regular army, if you will. You know? So I was critical of that, still am.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Mr. Sadia, you have a some honorable service in the area of humanitarian relief, and I know that well, I'm pretty certain that work that you've done that has in large part been in Somalia. Given what Brother Abukar just shared about the conditions there and the conditions as they have been for a number of years, those very challenging conditions that has rendered the country for most of the past decade or two unstable. I mean, just kept it in an unstable kind of state. What are your thoughts on what you know about that situation through the prism of humanitarian relief need, and also what have been, from what you've been able to see, the impact or the implications for some our brothers and sisters here in this country and in other parts of the world who are a part of the diaspora outside of Somalia. I mean, how does the conditions in Somalia impact the diaspora? I guess that's the question that I'm raising from your perspective.
Well, thank you. That's a broad question, and I hope I will be able to address at least some of it. You're right. I did work in Somalia. I went there 2012, came back, and then went back twice. So I was there from 2012 until 2017, 16 actually, December. Came back and then went back. And the last time I came back was March 2020. The situation, the humanitarian organizations, even though there are organizations that do work that's worthwhile, there are organizations that spend a lot more on overhead, offices, hotels, staff brought from outside. For example, when I worked there from 2012 until December 2016, I lived outside the green zone, which means I had a full access to the Somali community, Somali civilians, whether they were in Mogadishu or in the rest of the country. I was managing programs that were serving people across the country, throughout the country, Somalia. So I was based sometimes in Mogadishu, sometimes in Garowe, which is in Puntland, capital city of Puntland, sometimes in Hargeisa, what's known to most now Somaliland. I was also in Kismayo and the border with Kenya, Dolo area, and I was also in Baydhabo. So basically, I traveled through the country, and in some areas I traveled on the road. And what I've noticed and realized was these organizations, and I say this, when I first traveled there for the humanitarian mission, was with the funds from the Muslim community here in the United States and other communities. When we went through the drought 2011, and we served the communities that were at the border of Kenya, what I said on VOA was, what I saw was so many organizations, so much money was being spent, but there were no collaborations, no coordinations. What I also noticed was that we had people who were being given food, for example, rice, oil, milk, powder milk. They will be placed individually, sort of put individually, like for example, 100 people, and they will put them in different places. So people can come, they will march like soldiers, they will grab their food and they will leave. But what I noticed was they will be left there so organizations can change the banner on the back. So one organization will place it there. One organization will put their banner. They will take the picture, and then they will remove that, and another organization will put it there. So basically, multiple organizations were using the same distribution area, saying that they have delivered the food. It's not that they were not delivering the food, but they were not delivering as much as they say they were delivering. And another thing that I've noticed that the community has shared with me was World Food Organization, for example, with the UN. It will flood the market with food, rice, and grains, and different kind of perishable foods. And people who were farming were not able to sell their food. And when I talked to the community and they brought this to my attention, what they were saying was, what was the point of farming if World Health Organization or other organizations will flood the market with these free foods, which were not mostly really what the community could use. You give rice, oil, and powdered milk, when in fact people were producing foods that would provide a lot more, nutrition, that were more diverse, and they were also, gaining capital for their families also, so they will be able to, use it for treatment of medical treatments, or to travel if they needed to, or to take care of their families, to send the kids to school. So now they're stuck in this cycle of poverty, where they had to wait for the funds and the foods coming from, these international organizations. Another example is when I was based in Mogadishu, I was based close to the green zone. So every morning I'll be leaving, going to my office. And what we're saying is we have millions and millions of dollars coming from the United States, where we needed to educate kids and basically establish public schools. And we were doing that. But these schools were occupied by either people who were warlords or militias or heads of militias. So those schools could not be used. So we had to reconstruct new schools. And then those new schools were not used by people who were in need. For example, over 1 million people are internally displaced in Mogadishu. And those people, when I'm going from my office from my house where I was housed to the office, I would see all these kids who are playing on the streets, who are displaced in these little huts, in these little bushes. And when I talk to them, I used to take a chocolate and distribute just to talk to them. And I would ask them why they're not in school. And what they would tell me is because we don't have, opportunity to go to school because we cannot pay for these schools. So we're building and reestablishing what's supposed to be public schools because other schools cannot be accessed. And the government doesn't have the authority or the resources to sort of confront these either former warlords or militias, to sort of move them out of, remove them from the public schools. So the schools that we're using are being charged. So the families cannot pay for these schools. So the humanitarian crisis in Somalia is real. But unfortunately, everything is overshadowed by what Abubakar talked about, which is the elections and the international community and what they're doing on the green zone. The last visit that I was there, I was in Halane, which is what we call the home of the ghost lords. That's Abubakar's created term, ghost lords. And I remember when I wanted to go outside, I was not able to do that. I was told I have to wear a helmet, a bulletproof, and use, this, armed vehicle. And that will cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Of course, I was not able to go outside. And that was only like 2 weeks that I was there, and I felt like a prisoner. And these people supposed to be taking care of the Somali people. So there is a wall between the money and the humanitarian organizations and the people who are in need. So it's like they live in two worlds, like city divided by green zone, people with all the money, with all the organizations, with all the resources, and people who are in need, who are not the politicians and not the powerful, but the actual human beings who are in need, the civilians, the real people. So it's a very sad, but that's just a little bit of what I can mention.
And briefly, how does that, what you just described, how does that impact Somalis in the United States and in other parts of the diaspora, where they're living, many of our brothers and sisters are living as refugees in foreign lands?
Somalis in the diaspora, particularly United States, or I should say all of the diaspora, really have done a wonderful job in some ways. They go back, they see the need, and they either go on the business side and they establish small businesses, or they go into the humanitarian and they establish humanitarian organizations, or they fundraise in the diaspora and they send those money, or they take it on their own and then make sure they deliver and they provide the actual food. Of course, they're not innocent. Somalis in the diaspora are not innocent, and I don't want to make them sound as though they're angels. They are part and parcel of the problem. Right now, the conflict between the government officials, they're either with one, like let's say the president, or they were with the prime minister. So there is no middle ground where you have a community that's able to foster a peace or nurture any agreement that exists to bring the two sides together. In fact, they exploit the problem because each is enjoying what the other is providing.
Yeah.
So they have become part and parcel of the problem. And sometimes some people, we don't know what to do. So we either sit back and watch with sadness, or we retrieve into our little caves of, trying to just pretend that this doesn't exist, or we join them like they're doing. Or the fourth is just to say as much as you can on social media and try to educate. It's very sad.
Yeah. I knew that this hour was going to fly past fast. Before we get into the final moments of our 1 hour conversation, I want to ask my brother Abukar, who's in Columbus. Our sister Dr. Sadia she resides in Northern Virginia, which also has a sizable Somali population, mashallah. But I want to ask my brother Abukar, who's in Columbus, about the murder of Imam Muhammad Hassan Adam. I had the pleasure of meeting the brother some years back. I know he is a respected figure in Columbus. I had a very good impression of him when I was introduced. My condolences to his family and also to the community. Brother Abukar, has there been any progress made at all in the investigation?
And no.
And tell the audience, what you know. Share some of what you know about this brother, Imam Muhammad Hassan Adam.
Yeah. Our brother Imam Muhammad Hassan was a well-known figure in this community, a pillar in this community, in fact. And he's been here for many years. And he has done a lot of different programs, including one geared towards educating the youth and keeping them off drugs and all those things. Very bright young man. And his loss has touched the entire community, in fact, in so many different ways. As far as the case is concerned, there's not much that's been revealed by the Columbus police, and then because the case is still under investigation. Yesterday, you might have seen it on the news. There has been not yesterday, Friday, there was a demonstration in downtown Columbus, joined by the local Somali community and Muslim community at large, and the interfaith part of them came and participated. So it was a large protest, so to speak, show of trying to pressure the Columbus Police Department to not take lightly, because there has been murders in the Somali community since 2017. There's been about, I think, roughly about 34 or 33 maybe, and just about 3 of them were solved, and the rest of them are cold cases that they're not investigated anymore, and they're just shelved, basically. We were just in, or the community was, I couldn't participate because I was, Omicron got me, I guess, or something that's still, I have the traces in my voice.
Yeah.
So I couldn't go, but certainly those who did, the whole intention was to pressure the Columbus Police Department to take it seriously and to help the community find these murderers, whoever they are. We don't care, whether they are people who are outside the community, inside the community, because human beings tend to commit crimes, in whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims,
Yeah.
So we don't care. We just want whoever did that crime to be apprehended, to be brought to justice, and justice be served to Imam Muhammad Hassan Adam's family and his loved ones, and the entire community for that matter, and to send a signal that we're not going to accept these kind of things to happen to our community and be silent.
Right.
Yeah. So
Sadia,
we're hopeful. We're hopeful because
Yeah.
Joyce Avenue, by the way, the area where his body was found, they have a lot of strategic cameras on the street.
Okay.
I personally, and this is my personal observation, I think they're gonna find whoever it is, because the police tend to park cars that are equipped with cameras in those areas as well, because it's areas that are main artery for drug distribution, if you will, because one of those streets that lead to certain neighborhoods, if you will, and they have those kind of cameras. So I would imagine they would find that person or persons who were responsible sooner or later. And Care Ohio put up a $10,000 reward for whoever brings information that leads to the arrest of those criminals. So chances are very good that they will find whoever did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sadia, you have.
I just wanted to say my condolences also to the family and the community of Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine in Ohio. Abukar, you might know her, Maryam Duale.
Yes.
And she was really saying a lot of good things about the Sheikh. She said he was one of the first, Muslim scholars who have accepted the idea that we bring the mental health discussion to the masjids.
Yes.
And she was really, she said he was amazing. It's just very sad that the community has lost him.
Yes.
I heard a lot of good things about him. May Allah bless him.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this to a close. I want to thank both of you for joining us today, inshallah ta'ala, and sometime in the very near future, I want to have that conversation on, the challenges that are emanating from the Horn of Africa, which would also include Somalia, as well as Ethiopia Eritrea, and some of the other countries that are considered part of the Horn. There's much rich discussion we can have about the interplay of dynamics in that region of the world and how it is impacting other parts of Africa, the continent, as well as the foreign policies of states like the U.S. and France and Britain. Inshallah, that's another conversation for another time. I want to thank both of you for joining us today. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll have you back. I want to conclude today's broadcast after my giving our traditional closing. I want to conclude. I want the final word in the broadcast to be a clip of the late former South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu, along with this caveat that I plan to do a special video presentation on Desmond Tutu, sharing some background on his life, as well as sharing some personal perspective that I have on this now departed leader. I had the opportunity to spend some time, part of a day, with the then Archbishop when he came to Boston years ago, and generated controversy when he addressed the Palestinian issue and made the comparison of the apartheid that he and his people had known in South Africa with the apartheid, as he termed it, that was taking place in occupied Palestine. That sent off a wave of controversy and attacks. He was the target of attacks, but alhamdulillah, this was a leader that never backed down from the position of telling the truth. He never backed down. Yeah. And so inshallah ta'ala, we're going to share some perspective on him either later today or tomorrow in a video presentation that we're going to do, inshallah. But on that note, I want to again thank our guests for today and close out as we normally would before the video. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr, which means in the translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
You remember the one about the Archbishop? He dies and he goes to heaven, where he thinks he should be going. But when he gets there, St. Peter says, Miriam, you don't belong here. You've got to go to the other place. So I go to the other place, the warmer place. And 2 weeks later, there is frenzied knocking on the doors of heaven. And St. Peter goes and he opens, and there's the devil standing on the doorstep. And Peter says, no, Tuyo, what are you doing here? And the devil says, you sent Bishop Tutu down there. He's causing so much trouble. I've come to ask for political asylum.